Members, we are now live on YouTube, just so you know.
Okay, everybody, 7 o'clock. We'll crack on and start the meeting. We've got a full agenda, so we'll just crack on as quickly as we can. We start off with apologies for absence and substitutions. I've got Councillor Hirsch is substituting for Councillor Ball. If there's any other apologies. Declarations of interest? None, thank you. Matters to be considered in private? There are none. Minutes of the meeting held on 6th of October 2022. Everybody read and happy with the minutes? Thank you very much. We'll move on. So we'll go to the first item on the agenda, which is the mid-year report on the work of the Safer Ealing Partnership. And we have Superintendent Bennett, who's going to come and present his report, and then we'll have questions afterwards. Would you like to come and
Thank you, Councillor, for inviting us along to provide this update. I will go straight into the Oversight Committee briefing paper, which I put together for this meeting, which answered some of the recommendations which were set at the meeting back in April. Very much as we go through it, you'll see that a lot of this is around trust and confidence, which is one of the BCU priorities at the moment, and obviously Met wide as well, given the need to improve our trust and confidence with the public, across the NPS and obviously within Ealing as well. So very much we're focused on those activities, and we'll take you through some of those as part of this update. So recommendation 1 was around information shared with members by the West Area BCU on the community trust building initiatives currently planned, particularly in relation to stop and search and use of Section 60 powers. And as you'll see in the report, there's quite a few things we have been doing which were in train at the last meeting, but have obviously progressed since then. So one of those is the youth scrutiny panels. Traditionally, we've not been great at involving young people in reviewing stop and search and how we do things, and very much our work is focused on that, particularly young people from underrepresented communities. So these have been in place in Ealing since March, and very much, we've been working with youth offending services around representation at that meeting, and very much it's around, trying to explain why police do things, but then allowing that feedback in terms of improvements that young people would like to see in relation to those. So very much, we've had some good feedback from those sessions, and as you'll see from the report there, someone did say who were subsequently stopped and searched, that they did realise that police were just doing their job and was fairly relaxed about it. I'm not saying all interactions would be like that, and I think the good thing about the youth scrutiny panels, it does allow us a sort of two-way conversation on that, and we can then look at how we benefit our processes and procedures in order to make sure we're dealing with those situations in the right way and in the best interest of the person that we've actually stopped. Chief Inspector Paddy Greer, who sits to my right here, is one of my chief inspectors that currently sits over the trust and confidence work for me, and has been very much key to driving our work around stop and search. So I'll just invite him to say something about the youth scrutiny panels.
Thank you. So as Mr. Bennett said, the youth scrutiny panel is in place since March this year. We had with Ealing YGS, we had a number of panels so far, and the work's continuing. We had a meeting earlier today as well to plan further scrutiny panels in the coming year. And we'd also like to introduce new ways of working, where not just with young persons that have been affected by a stop and search, but also giving their parents an opportunity to come be part of this session together with us, so that if they have any queries or concerns in relation to stop and search, then we can address those by working with them. But that will be coming in the new year.
Thank you. And as reported at the last meeting as well, we were looking at stop and search and how we can review the impact of those really. I think, you know, for a number of years, we've deployed those without really engaging the community around Section 60s. So we do have a process in place, which I think we've actually had to use, thankfully, in Ealing very much since it was enacted, about bringing in partners and some of the community monitoring groups that we've got, people from those panels that we have, to actually review Section 60s with us as well. Sometimes it's not obviously very restricted what information we can give out on why we've put Section 60 in place, but post that review, we can then discuss the reasons for that, what the impact was locally from that Section 60 going in, and were the correct procedures followed in terms of informing the local authority and other partners that we should do as well. So that is in train, and again, Paddy's put that in place for us. And very much we'll review that and work with partners around making sure that is effective. In relation to stop and search, community monitoring groups are enacted we have 8 planned in Ealing. So we're looking to 8 a year in the Ealing location around the wider community. So outside the youth scrutiny panel, this is a range of other people that we deal with within the local community, around sitting down again, just reviewing stop and search and how we do it, some of the figures behind that, some of the disproportionality numbers, which we need to address locally and in the MPS as a whole. And we're looking to increase the membership of those community monitoring groups, get more young people on them and people from underrepresented backgrounds as well. And we've had some success in that since the last meeting. It's not just stop and search, we review body-worn video footage as well as part of those community monitoring groups. Getting into new recruits and setting expectations with them around stop and search is again really key to how we develop, both in the short but also the longer term. So if officers get the right inputs when they first join the police, there's better chance that they'll carry that through their career and pass it on to new recruits as they mature. So very much police officer training. We've been bringing young people into that have gone through stop and searches to talk about their experiences as to how that felt, and just make sure that the young officers have that insight in terms of because people will have very bad instances of being searched. I know my brother-in-law got searched going back to the late 70s. He still talks about it now, which was a very bad experience. So, I know what long-term impact it can have if things aren't done in the right way. And so very much police officer training, bringing in people to give that experience is really important. In terms of disproportionality and quality assurance, we are dip sampling our searches on drugs, which forms the highest number of why we do stop and searches. So we just dip sample those to sort of make sure that we're happy that things have been done in the right way. And if we think that something has been done correctly, then we'll look at that and see what learning we can take from that, either individually to the officer concerned, or if it's more of a wider trend, we can then sort of see what further or wider instructions we need to give out, or how we change things. So that's a regular thing that's going. Also, we make sure that supervision stop and search is done in a timely fashion as well. And we monitor that in our performance figures every month, because obviously the quicker the things get supervised, the quicker we can pick up on any issues and make sure that if something's been done incorrectly, that we get that changed straight away. Again, in the report, I talk about #listen, and that's something which we've been developing through the year. That is really making engagement opportunities with young people, particularly within the Black community. And we've been building up our different ways of doing that. So some of the stop and search youth scrutiny panel work will fit into that. But again, we've also got a questionnaire that sits behind that, which we're trying to encourage different community members to try and share that with their community groups where they can. And very much since the last meeting, we've put an engagement strategy in place as part of our trust and confidence plan to really drive forward how we engage with young people. And we are forming some good strategic relationships with some of the local, University of West London, we're having conversations with at the moment, but also some key partners. In the report, it mentions Bishop Crossfield, who's based in Southall, and we've been down to speak to his community as part of #Listen, and very much people like that are a link into the communities, which we can increase those listening opportunities. In terms of recruitment, we do need a police force that looks and feels like the communities that we serve, and we're not there yet by any measure. There have been improvements in terms of recruitment, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But the outreach programme, it's MPS wide, but we have been given a dedicated team on the West Area BCU to increase recruitment from underrepresented groups. So they try and attend different locations, sort of busy high streets, events, and they'll just speak to people about the job, the benefits of joining the job. Obviously, when we get stories about racist, misogynistic language used by police officers on WhatsApp groups and in other areas, that dents that program of work effectively, because obviously that then impacts on trust and confidence in police with underrepresented groups, and then they're less likely to want to join. So we have to, we've got some serious incidents, the shooting of Chris Cabba in September. Again, understandably, they cause massive community concerns about police. And again, that does make it difficult for us. But the outreach program is there to try and listen to people and try and encourage them to join the police. And that is ongoing. They're out there every week in different places, trying to get people to join and apply for the Metropolitan Police. Walk and talk. We've been doing these regularly in Ealing. We did them after where we've had some serious incidents. We've deployed those so we can listen to the community about certain areas where they might feel unsafe. The offer primarily is there for females, really, to contact the police and say, I've got an area where I feel unsafe, and we will then offer a walk and talk with either that individual, or we can do it with groups as well. We did a number of them for International Women's Day. And again, that's a program of work which I've got an officer that oversees that for me, and very much welcomed. And they're running quite well across this borough and the other boroughs which we cover as well. Street Safe, I talked about at the last meeting. I think we need to do a bit more promotion around Street Safe. It is there. You can access it via the MOPAC and MPS websites. And effectively, you can go on there and report, again, areas where you feel safe. So such an alleyway where the lighting's not great, or there's regular antisocial behaviour, you can report it via that method, and then we pick that up, and then we work with relevant partners around how we can improve that location. So that is still there. I think it needs a bit more of a push, to be honest. But as I say, it is a key tool in terms of us identifying locations where people don't feel safe. Positive activity initiatives, we're doing I think about 15, 16. So that will equate to about 5 in Ealing of those. Now, what those are initiatives where we do work with voluntary partners within the community, again, trying to reassure the public and give them confidence in police work. So some of it would be around personal safety. Some of it would be focused on knife crime. So it might involve weapon sweeps, again, personal safety information, whatever within that location we feel would benefit it. A PAI, positive activity initiative, is there to really try and sort of put some focused resources against the problem. And what we do a survey at the start before that work starts, and then we do it at the end. So to see what impact that's had on community confidence in that area. And those are ongoing, and it's very much something which Commander Hadari, who's sits above Chief Superintendent Wilson within the Met Police, really drives through, because it has been shown to have significant impact on trust and confidence within specific areas where those have been enacted. One thing which we are working towards for Ealing are reporting hubs at religious premises. So we are in discussions at this moment in time to bring those in. We have piloted them in some other locations, and they're not a new idea. I think it's just one of those things which we've most not been great at sustaining. So what there'll be areas where, rather than people coming directly to police, if they don't feel confident to do that or don't want to do that for whatever reasons, they can go to a location where they may feel safer, where they can be supported, and have the opportunity to report crime or incidents within that location. So again, it's recognising that, as I say, sometimes contacting police directly is a barrier to actually hearing what's going on, either with individuals or communities, and very much we need to make sure that we can try and break those barriers. And sometimes that's relying on partners to help us do that. And the self-reporting hubs is really a key one of those initiatives that I want to land, for Ealing in the next month or so. And we can report on that at other relevant meetings as we move forward. Again, self-defense classes. This is an offer which we've been building really through the year. And this is around offering, again, primarily females, personal safety instructions. So we've funded that via the BCU. I think we've got some money from other areas as well to contribute to that. So that is paying for instructors to help empower females to feel that they can defend themselves better if they were to get into a situation where someone was looking to attack them. And again, they've gone down really well. Other places in the country are looking to take that on, and definitely other areas within the NPS as well. So that's been a real success this year, and that's open to females from all three boroughs to go to those sessions. So that gives you an idea really around some of the trust and confidence work that we've been doing, and you can ask some questions on that when I get to the end of the report. But if I move on to the other recommendations now, and so we can come back to any questions you've got on those once I've gone through that. But recommendation 2 was around information on the upcoming boundary changes for safer neighbourhood teams, and that's to be shared with councillors by the West Area BCU. So I've put an update in the report there. So as it says, we're in the final stage of implementing changes to address the ward boundary changes. All dedicated ward officers and PCOs are now assigned to their revised ward areas, and new mailboxes have been established. So where we are now really is promoting, what we want to do is promote the numbers that people can contact to get in touch with their local teams and make sure that they know who's on their local team. So the NPS were behind the curve compared to where the local authorities were on this. So it has taken us a little while to catch up. But I think now we're in a good position regarding it. And as I say, we need to really get the contact details of the teams out there now, so people can have that reassurance around who their local teams are and who they need to contact. And also we've worked on all wall panels having an online capability as well. So previously people used to have to go to the wall panels and physically do that, but having an online capacity, hopefully that will increase membership of some of those. And definitely within West Area, I'm looking to do a bit of a review around wall panels and how they operate as well, just to make sure they're doing what they should be doing and we've got the right representation on those wards. But very much in terms of boundary changes, we're coming to the end of our work on that. So recommendation 3 was in-depth data on police recruitment from underrepresented communities, including historic data to show changes over time, be shared with the overview and scrutiny committee by the West Area BCU. Apologies, I didn't have the data to send out in the report. I did have to do a bit of digging on it, and we did actually find it is actually on the NPS website. So I think if you go there, you'll be able to find that. But in terms of police recruitment over the last 10 years for people from underrepresented, Black, Asian, multi-ethnic heritage backgrounds, back in 2012, 2013, in terms of recruitment, 19.58% were from those groups. The latest data for 2021-22 is at 23.05%. Last year, it was 18.87%, and the year before that, 17.25%. So I think that shows you the outreach program's been around for about a year now. So that most probably reflects the work which they're doing. Those numbers aren't as high as we would like at all. So we do need to still work harder on that. But definitely over the last 3 years, it has been an upward trend in getting underrepresented groups to join the police. Out of interest, I know it wasn't part of the question, but for female recruits for the last 3 years, so 2020, 31.8% were females. 2021, 37.46%. And then 2022, that went up to 38.82%. So in terms of female officers, that again is an improving picture regarding that. And that's obviously reflected in our general numbers across the MPS. Recommendation 4 was the West Area BCU should work with other partners to reach out to men and boys in the community to address issues on misogyny. And I'm pleased to report that since the last meeting, we have undertaken some activity around that. So we do have a few initiatives which we are engaging with. One commissioned by Ealing Council being led by Tender, and also we've got Beyond Equality, which we're delivering in workshops at schools as well. So we've got those 2 programs, and that's very much recognising that there's too much burden on females to safeguard themselves. I think we had that question at the last meeting where that was covered, and there is no onus on men to recognise that there is an issue within males in terms of us being overwhelmingly the perpetrators of domestic related crime. So those sessions do offer the opportunity to look at ourselves as males and and the way we should behave effectively. And those initiatives, they've only just started, so we haven't reviewed those yet. But I don't know if Paddy, you've got any further information on that.
So with Beyond Equality, we had we trialled this with 6 schools, 2 in every borough. And the initial plan was to have them in person, but due to the time period at the time, they wanted to run those workshops online. We want them to come in person. That's more value when they come in and directly engage with young people. So the next workshops will be coming in the next few months, and this will be in person. We'll review this together with young people. We'll be there ourselves, our colleagues, and depending on the feedback, we will like to continue with this. And it's all about education, educating young men and boys in relation to the behaviours.
Thank you. And recommendation 5, West Area BCU provide additional written assurance to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on how they would prevent an occurrence of a search similar to the search of Child Q. Obviously, at the time of the last report, the impact of that was being felt quite significantly, and it still resonates now very, very heavily, particularly amongst Black communities. I'll give you some assurances that I think locally, very much we made sure with our schools teams particularly around what the correct procedures were around this, and very much we should not be doing those type of searches within schools. To support that, the MPS did introduce a new policy. So any searches that were similar to the ones which Child Q was subjected to will now have to go through an inspector at the authority level, whereas previously I think it was a sergeant. We have to create a report for every instance of that, so it's recorded properly, and a Merlin safeguarding referral must also be submitted in relation to those. And it's very much, as I say, we haven't had one on this borough of that type, and I think with the measures we put in place, we wouldn't expect that to happen. And Paddy, I don't know if you think more you want to add around the process.
No, just one quick thing around the policy. It's scrutinised as well, so all searches similar to Child Q are scrutinised centrally, and that's every search within the Met. And if the policy is not followed, then the stop and search lead for the area is informed, which is myself. I haven't had any sort of concerns raised since the policy was introduced, and the number of searches similar to those are coming down as well. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And then recommendation six, sorry, it was senior officer of the West Area BCU to attend the overview and scrutiny committee in the first half of next year. I think that includes this meeting, to get evidence on how the police are measuring the impact of initiatives to tackle institutional racism and bias, particularly in relation to the disproportionate use of stop and search on Black communities in the borough. The measurable impact initiatives and operations to reduce violence against women and girls has had very much, and I think in your pack there you've got some figures around stop and search, and you know we do review those on a monthly basis in terms of where we are. So for example on stop and search proportionality, and apologies, my figures just go to October 2022. When you look at stop and searches for the Black community, November last year it was 5.5 people per 1,000 of the population of the Black community were subject to a search. And then that was 4.8 in December last year and 5.3 in January. That has come down. In August, it was 4.8, September 2.8, and then October 3.9. So there's been some marginal gains. That is still disproportionate in terms of the general population of Ealing, but very much, you know, the measures we're talking about today is working hard to address that and make sure that we can reduce that further. So it's an ongoing bit of work, which clearly we still need to make progress on, but that gives us a good indication in terms of, you know, the impact of our work. And obviously, you know, some of it will be qualitative as well. So those interactions within the scrutiny panel, interactions within schools and young people will give us some qualitative feedback on how we're delivering stop and search. So if you are doing it, you know, what impact has that had on individuals? And as also we can monitor those via the number of complaints as well that we get from stop and search activity. So there's a number of ways we can look at that. In terms of violence against women and girls, we do again monitor that. Now when we go to meetings in Ealing, we do have figures which relate specifically to violence against women and girls, which we do brief in. So that covers where we are with offences as a whole, you know, what proportion of those violence against women and girl offences are domestic related, rapes or other types of sexual assault, and also the sanction detection rates as well. So all those measures are used to see how impactful our prevention work is, but also our investigative work as well. And again, they're very heavily looked at every month at the SLT performance meeting, and we brief those figures into meetings on a regular basis with public and local authority and other partners as well. So those are very heavily scrutinised. Again, violence against women and girls, you know, our performance is looked at quite closely every month as part of the MPS comparison. So internally with the relevant commanders look at those figures as well. And also if we are performing poorly, we're held to account by them. And the reason why we brief things into these sort of meetings is to allow ourselves to be held to account by the public as well. I think that those were the main areas in terms of the recommendations from the last meeting. So hopefully that's answered to some extent what those questions were getting at when they were originally set. But I'm obviously happy to take any questions on those.
Thank you very much. So we'll all go for questions. Just remember to address to the report and to the recommendations. There will be a new report later on in the municipal year. So it's really just very focused on the recommendations. We've got Councillor Driscoll, Councillor Kumar, Councillor Rice. Yeah.
Thanks for the report, and I'm glad to see several of the actions are really positive, especially with inclusions and getting members of the community who are less engaged. So that was really good to see. Just to go back with a couple of the recommendations, I think it was recommendation 3. I'm trying to go through my, 4. And it was talking about misogyny. Now, we just happen to also have our second paper this evening is about the Safeguarding Board, and that was also undertaking works to do with misogyny in schools and working schools. So I just wondered if there's any cooperation and liaison there. And as somebody who's taught for 20 years, it was great to get externals coming into schools, but often that would be seen as something that an external body delivers in schools, and then they would come and go, and it'd be very transient. So it'd be interesting to know how that recommendation is being more substantially embodied in the curriculum of schools, so it doesn't have to be delivered by the police. So resourcing and lesson plans and lesson activities, so that it's embodied there, because then it would be wider spread and wider implemented throughout many more schools. And then the disproportionality. When I was looking at the report and looking at the sort of, I mean, it's a long-standing criticism about disproportionality about race and stop and search. And I was looking at how that was going. I looked at the census surveys for Ealing, and broadly speaking, 2011 census has 50% white, 11% Black, Afro-Caribbean, 30% Asian. Now, Section 60s go to discrete geographical areas, but some of Ealing has very high concentrations of different ethnic groups, some less so. So the statistics are borough-wide, but if you've got a Section 60 in a certain area, you'll have a very different demographic. I mean, I looked at Acton specifically because I often get email notifications of Acton, and I saw there that Acton is slightly above the borough average for ethnic minority profile for Afro-Caribbean. It's 15, 16, 11%, depending on which ward you're looking at. The white proportion is above the borough average as well, and Asian profile is below. But there's no way of saying, well, Section 60 in that area, is it representative of that area? But then when I looked further on, there's a graph of proportionality and ratios. There's been a very marginal improvement in terms of ratios, but it's consistently below for other ethnic groups apart from Black Afro-Caribbean. So there's a lot of work to do there. So I'll leave it at those couple of points. Thank you.
Yeah, you must remind me of the first question again that you asked, but I'll come back to that in a second. But the in terms of that last question, I think that's why we're doing the work ultimately, and very much, I haven't covered everything we're doing there, but we are trying to increase opportunities. So one of those things will be around, we do ride along. So whereas traditionally we've had a few councillors and people that come along, very much we're trying to get more young people to come along on those and to, again, to look at how we do business and provide their thoughts on that. So I think, without going through the report again, I think all that work we're doing is trying to look at how we can reduce disproportionality in the work that we do. And some of that will be around trying to get out more regularly to consult. So again, one thing we're looking at doing is working with schools, going in there and just having open conversations around stop and search, and why we do it. Also mainly listen to them about their thoughts on it as well, which we can then feed back to our officers. So it's not something that's going to change overnight. It's something which is an issue across the whole of policing countrywide. But these initiatives are there to try and create a long-term cultural change in how we do things, and that's when we'll start to see the benefits. So yes, there is disproportionality, and we need to address those. But that's why we do that review work of the stop and search. In terms of the schools and embedding it, I suppose that's more of a question for the local authority, I think, in terms of the education side, about how they'd want to try and embed that work within schools. We do have schools officers that are dedicated to the schools, and very much they can provide some consistency of making sure that we cover those things within the school curriculum. But I think it's up to the local authority education about how they want to do that on a regular basis. I think we can sort of help and support that. But I think in terms of the curriculum, I think that's something which schools need to maybe agree about how they want to sustain it going forward. I think, because as you can imagine within the police, we do have different priorities, so we tend to focus our work around that. So within schools, we've got the Your Life You Choose, which we do go to different schools and deliver that. And at the moment, I suppose this has been delivered in a similar way to that. And then, if schools want to do some additional and make it more of a formal thing that they do every year, then great, we'll support the schools in doing that. But I think that's a decision which for them to take forward. Sorry, the first question again.
The first question was about the curriculum and embodied that.
Oh, right.
But just to come back to this section 60, because your reporting figures borough wide, but section 16 are geographically discrete areas, but there's no reporting by a section 60 area. So there's no delving deeper into that specific geographic.
I think what we do is part of the section 60 reviews, we'd then look at the figures. So I think that's where we'd have a closer look at those numbers and the disproportionality that came out of that section 60. So I think that's an opportunity to do what you're saying really, which is, look at a specific area where we've had concentrated activity and then sort of see, why our figures might be disproportionately towards one community in terms of stop and search and use of force. So I think that will be the key bit for us, is to get into that sort of local side of things. I don't know, Paddy, you what's going on?
Just to add to that, all section 60s are authorised. They are evaluated post section 60, and they're evaluated by the inspector, which covers how many people were searched during the section 60, how many hours that was, so how many people were searched. So looking at that, we can explore further the ethnicity of those people as well. But at the moment, with the post section 60 scrutiny, which has been something newly introduced to the borough, we haven't had any indication that our section 60 powers are, first of all, abused, or secondly, the demographics of the people that have searched, what ethnicity they're from. We just look at the overall number, but I can explore that further.
Thank you. I think part of my question's been answered, but briefly, how is the training, the new training that you propose is different from what's been happening so far? I know you've detailed, you brought in the stop and search policy. This is on recommendation 5, but how would it be different? And, how do you think it'll work better? And the reason I say that is that when you do the stop and search, you've got a rank officer now who will authorize the area. But I think the main thing with especially with younger people, or really anybody who goes through a traumatic experience of being stopped and searched and handcuffed immediately, and kind of, have that sort of aggressive approach before anything else happens. And you've explained about your brother-in-law. I think I'd like to see a bit more mention of that. That would actually clarify what I'm asking as well for other people.
Yeah, I mean, use of force. I mean, it's not, stop and search is one element of use of force, which officers might need to feel that they need to employ as part of their response to an incident or someone being stopped. It's very much, bringing people in to speak with them is a real key thing. So that is something which we weren't doing, say, a year ago or a year and a half ago. And I think that helps. It helps humanize the process. Very much, there's general training outside of new recruits, which we do, which is around diversity and inclusion, which again, that as part of what we do is something which, again, it's trying to give people insight into communities which they may not have had potentially. And, one of the commitments is we've committed ourselves as Metropolitan Police to activity around further training on Black histories and Black communities. That hasn't come out yet, but that is something which is supposed to be launched nationwide. And again, it's just to try and get more understanding within officers around those communities. So there's not one individual thing that's going to make the big difference, but this accumulation of different work that we're doing, and again, some of this is around how we engage with those communities, listen to those work and feed that back into our training and our the work that we do. And it's not just ongoing training. We do regular, every year, officers go for officer safety training, where again these issues are discussed and further inputs are given to them. The ongoing training is what I talked about earlier as well, which is looking at those stop and search reports and looking for disproportionality, looking where their grounds weren't, to the level which they should be for stop and searching. So that's ongoing development as well. And again, we weren't doing it to that level a year ago. So there's not one thing. It's a combination of a few things we've already talked about tonight. and doing that further engagement with the community and making sure our officers understand what's coming out from those interactions as well. But very much we have changed our approach, but it's it's just all these different things will hopefully add up to some significant changes, which we're not seeing yet. We've seen some slight changes, but as I say, hopefully once we get sort of those develop more and we bring in even more initiatives, then that will improve moving forward.
Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, officers, for such an excellent report, which actually met a lot of the thoughts that we did have last time round. We do talk a lot about young people as perpetrators of crime or being under suspicion of potentially perpetrating crime. We don't often talk enough about how young people are actually the victims of crime, probably far more disproportionately than anybody else, despite whatever kind of stereotypes that we might have. I mean, I grew up bullied as a child, but as a teenager growing up. But when I just hear about the things that are going on today, my heart really goes out to young people. You listen to mums talk about how their son has been chased home by people with knives trying to go to stab him. You've got a mother talking about her daughter who regularly gets beaten up on the way home from school, and she can't actually get to move out of that area and try and find somewhere safer. Some dreadful things are going on. So I'm just wondering that looking through the programmes here under recommendation 1, you've got Listen, for example. I'm just thinking about those types of programmes. What are we really hearing from people, not just about how they feel about maybe Stop and Search, for example, but how they feel about as victims of crime, as potential victims of crime, including men, because men are obviously very much in danger as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we do. So, our inputs into schools around knife crime, for example, very much cover that victims and, the chances of being lured into being exploited. And it's there to try and empower young people to stop and becoming involved with those. So, those sessions that we have within schools are very much sort of victim focused and trying to prevent young people from being victims and being drawn into crime themselves as well. So, we have a number of programs where we do engage with young people. So we've got programs linked in with Brentford Football Club, Kicks. There's boxing clubs which we do within West area as well. So there's a few things there where we do try and engage young people. What we're also trying to do is increase our engagement with the youth services within local authorities, and very much within Ealing. It's getting into the youth centres as well and just improving our interactions in those spaces. And that's, again, something which we're pushing forward with at the moment to try and leverage the interactions youth services have with young people to understand their experiences as victims of crime and see what else we can do around that. Obviously, we've got schools officers within the secondary schools, and we do engagement with the primary schools as well, which, we're there to liaise with the schools around, again, where children have been victims of crime. We can help support them via those methods as well. So it's something we are conscious of and we do work through. We obviously do sit on the various local authority meetings where those issues are discussed as well. But again, it's one of those things which we do work through. I mean, one good figure which we've got around knife crime, is knife crime with injury. We did see a 9% reduction in the last 12 months. A lot of time that will be affecting young people. So, a lot of the work we've been doing around the violence work has been making sure we've got officers deployed in the right places and a violence strategy, which has been driving through this year, which has involved local authority partners as well. So I think that hopefully shows some encouraging results from the work we've been doing around those areas where young people do frequent.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Sorry, just to go back on the point that you were making around if something's done incorrectly with the Stop and Search. I'm just kind of curious to know a little bit more detail about what those types of things are and how they're recorded, so that obviously then going forward, there's lessons learned. You've got like a base point, and then, kind of how you've improved from that. And then just, I've got another question, which is just on the Safer Neighbourhoods team, because you've mentioned about kind of establishing those teams, getting new inboxes and all the rest of it. And obviously, which is fantastic. but and this isn't your fault, it's a wider issue just around resourcing, and the fact I'm a councillor for North Hamwell, and we have one member there plus a PCSO, and he's regularly pulled out from his duties as a kind of a ward policeman to go and do other duties within other areas of London. And also obviously their time that they're dedicated for is during the day, and it stops at a certain point. So there's kind of, it's great that we've got a safer neighbourhoods team, but they're also regularly extracted out. So what are we doing to kind of mitigate that so that people do have a dedicated ward officer?
On stop and search, not on wards.
So in relation to stop and search, as mentioned before, we are really hot on our timely supervision, which we were struggling with initially last year. But what that gives us the opportunity to look at a stop and search record imminently within 24 hours. And if we're not happy with the encounter, then the learning is addressed with the officer, the team, or the BCU. So far, there's some concerns with stop and search where either the grounds are not given by the officer, or they're missing some bits of the grounds or the section that they're using. If there's any serious concern, for example, use of force, for example, if it's excessive force used, then we will take immediate action in terms of recording that as a formal complaint. Now, this is just internally what we're doing, but 3 months ago, we also came up with the stop and search team locally here. We came up with a separate mailbox for stop and search, which was initially shared with Ealing YJS. So our colleagues from Ealing YJS, they can, if they come across any concern from a young person around stop and search, they can directly email us on the mailbox, which is looked at by 2 of us. So that's why we did want to share with everyone initially, just to see how many reports we're getting on a weekly basis. But now that's shared with Hounslow and Hillingdon as well. Now we get 1 or 2 reports every month. But again, it's not excessive force. It's just when young people are stopped and they don't understand the grounds, or the young people believe that they have been spoken to in a rude manner, then our colleagues from local authority, our partners, they will then email us the details. We will look into it. So this is one of the other ways of ensuring that if there are any concerns, excessive force or any, again, grounds missing, or if the encounter is not up to the level there should be, that we address the issues. But touch wood, so far, we haven't had any major concerns. And I can assure you, this is not just initial supervision, not just the timely supervision I'm relying on, but we are also dip sampling around 100 stop and search records every month, just to ensure that our supervision is at the right level. And if there are any concerns raised, then we can address this.
Thanks, Paddy. In relation to resourcing, there's no point hiding it. The resourcing is a challenge within Ealing, West Area, and the Metropolitan Police at the moment. And we need to get more people into policing and joining the police. And I think all other forces across the country have a similar issue at the moment. What's happened is within West Area, we are seeing significant demand for 999 calls at the moment compared to the resources that we have against that. And that has to be the priority. If you dial 999, we've got to make sure that you're going to get a response from that, because that is the critical call at that moment in time. What that has meant for neighbourhoods is we have had to deploy officers from neighbourhoods to help with that response side of things, which has meant that officers haven't been on their wards as much as we would like. They are out there, they are doing work. It's just not as regular as we would like. What that means is there will be some vacancies on teams, because the way we recruit those people from primarily will be from response teams on West Area, and there are people waiting to come into neighbourhoods at the moment, but because the criticality of resourcing on response teams, they can't be released for that reason. And because we have to, as I say, we have to make sure that our 999 calls are getting answered. So we are working on it. What has impacted on that, which will be an improvement this month and going forward, is we've introduced a new IT system within the MPS, quite an extensive one in terms of, which will totally change the way we're working in a number of different areas. That will bring in efficiency over time. What that means, though, is officers have had to do 3 days worth of training on that in the last 3 or 4 months, which has led to quite some significant abstractions as well. What that means is, with the demand issues we've had around some of the aid recently around Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion, and obviously the bridges, that has all compounded to create quite a serious situation over the last 3 or 4 months. But that we are, there is some light in relation to training. That's stopped now. So we should see an improvement in abstractions from neighbourhoods because of that. And very much the Commissioner has it in his sights around resourcing. We're looking at some solutions relating to that as well, which will again help us. So, he's looking at some aid reductions in terms of requests from BCUs. So that should see less obstructions going to central aid to deal with public order situations. So yes, it is a problem. Those are some reasons why. But we have got people waiting to join neighbourhood policing, and hopefully the demand issues on response will start to improve over the next few months, which will see that being a possibility.
Well, Councillor Crawford next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent Bennett. It's a very comprehensive report, and we gave you a bit of a going over last time, and I was part of that. But I'm encouraged by the tone and the candour of what you've disclosed. I just, with your permission, Chair, wanted to Councillor Driscoll reference Section 60 in Acton. And I think what's important to highlight is something I highlighted in the original meeting: the working relationship between our safe labour team and policing set up in Acton and historical position with regards to Section 60. So I know that some of this work is being carried forward in what has been referenced already, but I can report from 12 years of being a councillor that every time there was a Section 60 deployed, I would then, and my colleagues would then get a briefing once the formal process had been undertaken and it's all been reviewed, to tell me, why that Section 1, very frankly, why that Section 60 was issued, what was the operational outcome, and what are the reasons, and what messages of reassurance we can take back as local community leaders to the community about why that's taken place and what needs to be rolled out in future. And actually at the very heart of that is a recognition of the fact that the best form of policing is preventative policing in the first place. And that's where the schools teams are so vital. I do have to say, in closing, the work of the Metropolitan Police. I mean, I went to school when they were bringing in schools officers, and I now see in my ward we've got Twyford High School, but you've also got our Acton Arc Academy, and even in the primary schools at St Vincent, and you get those visits quite regularly each term from a local police officer, and that means the children know who their local police officers are. So they're not necessarily what you were referencing earlier. They know about the role of the police. They know that the police can be trusted to handle issues delicately. And I would hope that what I'm speaking about in Acton is something that's being embedded throughout. And I know it is within Ealing's MPS, and I know that's shared across the Metropolitan Police. How effectively it's embodied within other forces and other boroughs and other tri-borough arrangements, that's something that's well beyond the scope of this panel. But I just want to commend you for the way you've taken action on some of those points, and I know there'll be a future report, Chair, where we'll take a longer view on some of that. But I appreciate the candour and the work that all of your officers are putting in to address some of those long-standing issues. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think for me it's about consistency. So, some individuals within wards, maybe because they've been there for a while, operate in a certain way, which they've got used to working with people in those areas. I think it's trying to get a process that sits underneath that, which is what the Section 60 work's doing really, is taking some of that best practice and making sure that everybody else is doing the same things as well. So there's that work to do. And schools officers, you know, I was reading something today about the community not knowing what police do, and if they did, they'd feel a lot more reassured. And the work that schools officers do is quite amazing, really, in terms of the issues they deal with, the disorder that they keep a lid on sometimes, you know, the way they respond to intelligence. They do a massive role within Ealing in terms of that and preventing youth crime, preventing assaults, you know, and some serious incidents. So you know, and that's one thing we want to do on as part of trust and confidence work. We need to make sure we get those stories and that work out in a way which is more transparent and open to the public. Because I think, you know, we hear a lot of bad stories about policing, you know, understandably within the national press, and you know that does need to be reported on. But we need to get better at making sure that the public are aware of what we do. Just the business as usual work, not the estate, you know, it's just the business as usual. And I think that's part of the trust and confidence plan I'm trying to drive through West area, is that's one of the work streams, is that communication bit. So again, that's just some work we need to do to see how we can do things differently in relation to that.
You've got Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't got the report in front of me, but my question is within the scope and spirit of what we are discussing today. And it's my experience as an elected representative trying to contact the police. And I'm sure, Superintendent Bennett, you are aware of what I'm going to say. It took me almost 2 months to get in touch with the police. I went through various offices through the Ealing Council, and then I had to actually send an email to the borough commander to get somebody to address the concerns which was raised by the business community as well as the residents. And it was very nice of you to come around for a walkabout the other day, where we met a lot of business people and also a lot of residents. But it shouldn't have to come to that. I think you heard from the lady herself that there were 11 CAD reports which wasn't responded to. So my question basically is, what's the best way for the local people to contact the local police? Because we don't want to be calling 999, that's for emergency, and they have to prioritize their workload, which we all understand. And also, you know, when people do call the local neighborhood teams, does somebody monitor whether those phone calls have been responded to or whether those emails have been responded to? And what happens as a result of those, you know, when you monitor them? And only thing I can say, I'm sure you experienced firsthand what the people were saying on that particular road and the number of business community. And, you know, it shouldn't have to take 2 months for somebody like me to get in touch with the police and to get somebody to listen to what we are saying. So basically, I understand that the police are understaffed. And I also understand that you have difficult jobs. You know, you're deployed in other areas which are of immediate priority. But at the same time, we can't neglect the local business community and the local people who are trying to get help from us. So what I basically want is how best for the people to contact the police and work with them.
Yeah, Councillor Dinser, that's really off topic. It's not what we're addressing this evening. So we'll ask the officers to respond. I'm going to ask Councillors Anderson and Rice, who both got questions, and then we'll wrap up. Anderson.
Thank you for the report and the presentation. It's been really helpful. I have kind of 3 questions that are kind of slightly disparate. I think colleagues have kind of asked about the stop and search kind of chapter, but it'd be really interesting to get your reflection on how easy you find it to actually use the data that is kind of provided to you or that you kind of use. Because I was kind of looking during the conversation on the Met Police website, and I just kind of had flashbacks of when I was looking at it a few months ago, how really difficult it is actually just to interpret it as far as how it's kind of presented. And, you know, for the ordinary citizen or business person, it's actually really hard to understand what the hell that they're looking at. So it really good to get your reflections on that, because obviously it's important when you're doing, when you're trying to improve performance in the way that you need to do, that it's not just looking at proportionality in and of itself, but there's all the other links, race and reason, and then race, reason, and the outcomes that you're kind of delivering. Second area is on self-defense classes. I think apologies if I missed it, but it'd be good to get a good kind of better understanding about how many women in Ealing and where in the borough have benefited from those classes, which sound like incredibly worthwhile, and the kind of broader demographics of the women that are kind of using that. And also how many you intend to kind of serve in the next tranche. And then finally, my third point is about recruitment. And again, it would be good just to get a better understanding of whether you have access to the kind of even more granular detail on, not just by ethnic group, but how those individuals are kind of being recruited and retained by worker type and by rank, because I think that's just as important than just having, meeting whatever the target is, or a certain number, a proportion of the workforce. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. Obviously, in terms of data, so I shall just answer the question around the contacting police. I think some of the abstraction issues we talked about would have impacted on the ability of officers to respond promptly to some requests coming in to them. Also, I think we've found that some of those details have been wrong, and which has caused issues in the past hence teams not monitoring those. I think with the work that we're doing about communicating out the contact details to now that we've got the new wall boundaries sorted within neighbourhoods, that gives opportunity to make sure everyone's got the correct details and make sure that officers are monitoring those emails and phone calls, because I think we accept that has been not as efficient as it should have been, particularly over recent months with the abstractions and some of those changes. So we will take that forward as an area of improvement, which we do need to look at. In terms of these stop and search figures, I can't answer for how they're displayed within sort of public facing areas, and we can maybe take that back as part of the stop and search. Paddy sits on stop and search goal group for West area. The goal group's a MPS wide one, chaired by a DAC. So maybe that's something Paddy can take back and have a look at as to how that data is reflected. I suppose, we get different reports within our own performance meetings. So, but if we're finding that people aren't finding those accurate enough, or it's easy to use as they should be, then we can take that back as something to look at. So in self-defense classes, I'll take that back. I don't think we actually record which areas, how many people from each area attend those. It's very much ran by one of our PCs with our support. So, it's not a sort of thing where we're taking lots of data and we're analysing the data around that. We can mostly get general figures on numbers and where those are being held and where we're looking to hold those in the future. But it's very much a programme which sits outside of our core business, I suppose, in terms of things which we would be driving through. It's an initiative which our officers are driving forward for us. So some of that data may not have, but again, I can take that out and have a look to see if we've got some specifics there for you. In terms of recruitment, there will be granular detail around that. I think getting access to that will be, we'd have to look to see how we did that. I think we don't get given that as a matter of course, that sort of granularity, the different ethnic groups which we've recruited and where within the rank structure they're leaving the MPS, which I suppose is what we're talking about, because there is that issue around people from underrepresented backgrounds and retention, and you know, and also promotion, how many within those groups get promoted as well. I think whole reports are done on those. I think for us to look at that locally would be quite a demand for us to look at that on a regular basis. But that is something obviously gets monitored via the NPS in a more general way, see how we can improve. And obviously then that gets filtered through back to us locally if there's improvements we need to make in there. But I don't see that granularity of detail. I think partly can maybe some sensitivities around that, which they don't want to release to us on a regular basis. But again, we can take that back to have a look at it, see if that is available potentially. But you know, as I say, that is looked at, and very much retention is something which is part of the strategy around our workforce planning locally.
Thank you very much. And the final question, Councillor Rice.
Yes, probably just not necessarily a question, but I think I thought I was going to be able to provide a helpful point before Councillor Dinser spoke. But when you're asking another question, looking at the kind of 999, just to say that, like in my ward, we've had an issue with unlicensed music events going on all night and causing huge issues with people. They couldn't actually get any help by contacting the police through normal methods, and so they were using 999, and that has helped incredibly. But I just feel really bad about the fact that we have wasted your 999 time over that. But I just compare it to the problem we have sometimes where people can't get hold of a GP appointment, so they go to A&E with simple ailments, and it's probably just, it's that kind of thing. It's not really great, and I really do appreciate it if you can take that away, because I don't want like residents ringing 999 over issues like this anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and I can understand it in terms of people doing that, and you know, I think the solution is very much on the police to make sure things like 101 and the contact via the local teams is more efficient than it is. The 101 issue is, again, more of an NPS-wide aspect. But I think what we can do locally is make sure that we can get the right contacts out to people about their local teams that can then pick up those issues. They won't be on duty normally when the UME will be sort of kicking off sort of early hours in the morning when it is causing those problems generally. But if there's a pattern of behaviour, they can change their shifts to address those. And it's just getting that information in the first place is important. But we'll definitely, as I say, it is on our radar already around the contact details for neighbourhoods, making sure that the teams are monitoring those and responding to those quickly and in the right way. And I think that will help a little bit around those issues as well.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Lots of good questions there. Thank you very much for the report, for presentation. The very good answers as well. In terms of recommendations, we're asked to note the contents of the reports, which I think we are noting, and we look forward to the next report in April. Good. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so excellent. So we'll go to the next item, and it's the Ealing Safeguarding Children Partnership and Ealing Safeguarding Adults Board annual reports for 21-22. We welcome back Sheila Locke, the independent chair who presented to us a few months ago, and we'll hand over to Sheila. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, it seems like only yesterday since I was with you, so thank you very much for inviting me back again. This is our opportunity to share with you the annual reports of both sets of safeguarding arrangements for children and adults. If it's okay, Chair, I intended just to briefly give you some common points that run across both reports, and then to say something around children's and pause and allow kind of any questions that members might have, and then to pick up the adults report so that we can deal with them separately if that's okay with yourself.
Yeah, that's what we did last time. It worked well, so we'll do the same thing. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, as the chair said, my name is Sheila Locke. I chair the safeguarding arrangements for both children and adults in Ealing. I'm independent, so I don't specifically work for any agency, but my job is to oversee the work of the partners who work together to protect the most vulnerable in the borough. The annual reports are produced on reflection of the end of year data. So these reports cover the period April 21 to March 22. And they come through this scrutiny process as part of governance. and they also go through the governance structures of our health partnership. Some common features of both reports this time. Demand in respect of safeguarding is up quite significantly in the case of both children and adults. We're seeing greater pressures on those in our communities who are more vulnerable. Although to some, COVID might be over and long dealt with, in safeguarding terms, we're still dealing with legacy issues arising from COVID. We are seeing a greater trend that started towards the end of last year around economic pressures, particularly on children, on families, and on more vulnerable adults. Things like fuel poverty, concerns about money, heating, those sorts of things, food, are real concerns for some of our residents, and they are coming up more and more in safeguarding concerns. We have got issues in relation to workforce across both children and adults, and in a way you touched on it with the previous item, but capacity around recruitment and retention, there are strains and stresses across the whole system, and so we are trying to deliver more with less is the reality, I think. And of course, it's also important to note that we are now in a position where we have some industrial action proposed, particularly across the health sector. So those conditions all together really make our role in terms of assurance as a safeguarding partnership even more important. So this year, what we have tried to do with the report is not just report on numbers, but really try to report on whether, as a result of working together, we make any impact at all on the residents that we serve and support. So if I turn to the children's report, I think you will note in the report some key things. We have tried very hard on the children's side this year to change the nature of our relationship with young people. We've always had a good participation from our children and young people in safeguarding in Ealing. But I guess this year we've handed a bit of control to them. They actually ran our annual conference last year. They have produced a film with partners this year about the work of safeguarding. And that film, I guess, is central to the way that this report is reported on our web presence, and central to the way in which we try to talk to central government about the work that we are doing. We've also tried very hard this year to make both reports a little easier to read. So as well as talking about our partnership and how we kind of share vision and principles together, we've tried very hard to really think about how we make a difference and whether and how we can improve the learning and experience and skill set of our frontline staff. So in the report, I hope that what you will see is an approach that gives some assurance about the work that we do with other partnerships. I was interested in the previous item, and I would want to say that since I last came and reported to Scrutiny, there have been improvements in the work with Safer Ealing, and there has been improvement in the work specifically with policing colleagues, and I hope that some of that is evidenced in the report itself. In terms of our priorities on the children's side this year, we have tried very hard to develop early support services to those most vulnerable children and families. And in order to do that, we have had to do a lot of work with our partnership so that they are signposting families to the right help at the right time, so that families don't get into difficulty. But you will see in the report on page 9 that in the period of this report, over 10,000 children have been supported through some of the early support work that is on offer. We are very, I think, rightly proud of that as a partnership. And I can say that the culmination of some of that early support work was an event that took place in February with our voluntary sector partners, and a further event that took place in October of this year, where we celebrated some of the contribution that community groups make to supporting families across Ealing earlier. We've done a lot of work around the front door in social care. We talk about it as being social care, but the reality is it's a front door that referrals come into that is made up of social care, health and police. So it's an integrated front door. And you can see from the report that it echoes some of what I said in the introduction, which is that, you know, referrals into that front door have increased by about 8% during the year. But that, I think, needs to be seen against a backdrop where, although demand has increased by 8%, young people being referred twice or more has reduced. So that suggests that the services are getting it right first time. And we also know that children going on to child protection plans, while it is one higher than it was when I reported last time, is still much lower than our statistical neighbours. There is a section on the report, in the report, around youth justice. Although as a safeguarding partnership we don't monitor youth justice, we have kept an eye on that cohort of young people. For some of the reasons that you've already articulated in your meeting, they are some of our most vulnerable young people. And I can say that we outperform all of our neighbourhood statistical neighbour authorities in terms of first-time entrants and in terms of young people in custody. I suppose the bit that I would really like to focus on is in two parts, really. Section 4 of this report gives you some idea of how we as a partnership have tried to promote active learning to our workforce. We have in the last year done a lot of work, some of it virtual, some of it face-to-face, but we have tried very hard to appraise our workforce of both local and national learning that is coming from the field of safeguarding. So you will see on page 16 of the report, we've done a lot of work around the engagement of fathers and male carers, partly because our practitioners and our workforce told us that it was quite hard to engage fathers sometimes. And I guess our approach to that was to say, well, maybe our methodology for engaging fathers isn't right. So you've got an example in the report of the impact of some of that in terms of one of our schools thinking very differently about how they might engage fathers of children with special needs through sport and through their engagement with football. We've done a lot of learning from serious cases, and you will see on page 17 some of that articulated in terms of some of the very positive steps that have been taken in relation to learning from serious cases. We've also done quite a lot of work around the learning from the front door through case audit activity. I think practitioners have very much said they like the new approach to work, and you've got some quotes from them in the report itself about how that has really helped them. But of course, I guess I take the approach that all the work we do is only as good as whether it makes a difference to the family or to the child that needs the service. So page 22 in section 5 particularly talks about some of the work that has been done on the priorities. So you will recall that our priorities are domestic abuse, and you will see in the report that we've done a lot of work, some of it led and co-produced by young people. I was interested in the earlier question about what happens in schools. Well, the Safeguarding Board has worked with our young people. They're the people delivering in schools to their peers. around things like consent, healthy relationships, exploring some of those issues around youth violence, etc. So, kind of a lot of work led by young people themselves. Some of that material has won national awards. Some of it has more recently been nominated for further national awards. We have also done quite a lot of work around engaging young people in training practitioners about some of the impact issues for them of domestic abuse in families. We have done a lot of work on risk and exploitation. And again, you will see in the report on page 23 that some of that has had a huge impact in terms of making things look quite different, I think, in terms of coming at that work from a perspective that sees the behaviour and talks to young people about the behaviour rather than labelling those young people as bad young people or negative young people. And that's been really successful because I think a lot of the work is now being led by young people themselves. And we are kind of translating that, not just in terms of educative programmes, but also translating it into direct work with young people so that they can support us to make the best plans that are going to help to make them safe. And you will see in the report, you've got some examples of how that's worked. We have been doing a lot of work on mental health. One of our pieces of work in Ealing was recently used as part of a national workshop led by the National Safeguarding Panel. And it was a piece of work where we had looked at cases of young people with mental health difficulties and exemplars of self-harm. And it was the first report of its kind that we co-produced. It was a report that was written half by the professionals and half by young people. And that's why nationally they liked it so much in terms of the focus. We've done a lot of work around sexual abuse and we are continuing to do that work. So page 28 in section 6 talks about the priorities going forward. We want to continue a focus on performance. We want to continue focusing on learning and our workforce and the partnership as a whole. But underpinning that are the priorities of domestic abuse, exploitation, mental health and sexual abuse. And I think our work with the ICB and the CCGs to embed that will be quite crucial going forward. So as the independent chair and scrutineer, I can say that I think that through the meetings that we have, through the performance monitoring, I can give a good level of assurance about our safeguarding activity. I'm reassured that some of that was also picked up by Ofsted in their recent focused visits, looking at our front door activity. And the positive feedback we got from Ofsted suggested to me that we were on the right track and that things that I was saying were very much aligned with the things that they were saying. So I think, what I can give to you as a scrutiny panel is a high level of assurance that the partnership is working well, that we are delivering the things that we need to deliver. But I would just reinforce what I said at the beginning, which is that demand remains high and that there remain workforce challenges, particularly around recruitment and retention. And I'll pause there, Chair, if I may.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Very good report. Any questions? Looking to the room, there are no. Councillor Driscoll.
Thanks for the report, and it was good to hear about the front door and how that's been reviewed, because I know that was raised as an issue of concern with Ofsted and how the systems have changed with that. So I think that's welcome to see that in the report there. And I know we've seen an increase in uptake, but it's kind of reassuring that the system seems to take that on board well, and we're not getting re-referrals, and it seems to be engaged effectively. So that was good. I'm just going to go back to some of the education and the schools work. I'm glad you've expanded on some of the work with schools and how pupils and young people are involved, and the young Ealing safeguarding and the mentorship roles are taking place. So going forward, I know the Young Ealing Safeguarding Initiative was in a couple of schools, I think, and the mentoring was in also a sample of schools. Is there a plan to sort of roll that across the borough? Because I think there's 17 high schools in the borough. So I know we've got a small Acon, start very small and we'll go along, but are there other schools going to be on track to come on board with that? Because that's quite a positive approach. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And absolutely, we would very much like to see the Young Ealing Safeguarding group rolling out their programme of activity to all of the high schools across the borough. Capacity is sometimes the challenge around that. We do have plans in place. We will be working to implement those plans, but we want to make sure that what we don't do is overpromise and underdeliver with the resources that we've got. So it's something we work on quite closely with our young people, but certainly that is our plan.
Think we've got any more questions? So we'll go on to adults, please.
Thank you. Okay, so the adults report looks a little bit different, although it has got the same themes in it. And it looks different because the requirement from central government is slightly different in terms of the Care Act. We have tried again in this report to focus on a kind of plan, do, review kind of methodology, and tried much harder to think about, you know, whether we do make any difference in terms of what we do together. So, you know, you will see on page 8 of the report, sorry, on page 7 of the report, that we have tried to get across in Ealing that the safeguarding of vulnerable adults is everybody's business. We've had quite a push this year to get people to think that when we talk about safeguarding, we're not just talking about, you know, the over 65s, we're talking about all adults. And I think that push is now starting to see results in terms of the quality of data that we're receiving. So we're certainly getting much more data about under 65s in relation to both domestic abuse and mental health. And it is something that we will continue to push, because vulnerability doesn't just start as you get older. You know, for some of our adults, you know, they have vulnerabilities that need services much earlier. So a focus that we've been trying to push, really, and we've been trying to do that in a way that seeks to encourage neighbourhood and community spirit, but also to make sure that services are appropriately personalised. You will see that there are some common themes with the children's report. We've been pushing to engage with our frontline practitioners. We've done a lot of those kind of virtual conversation pieces with our frontline practitioners over the course of the last year. And we've expanded that to also include some of our major providers of home care and residential and nursing care. And that, I have to say, has been hugely successful. You will see on page 12 of the report that there are increases in relation to safeguarding concerns being raised. I don't think it will surprise any of the members present that many of those safeguarding concerns are skewed by mental health concerns being received. And we're trying to understand that a little bit more. I'm going to just say something when I come to the end of the performance bit about what we're trying to do around the adult front door. We also know from our performance data that we are concerned that there is an over-representation of Black and minority ethnic groups in relation to some of that mental health data. And just today, I've had a meeting today where I've kind of pushed back again and asked the Mental Health Trust and partners to provide me with some reassurance. Really, it doesn't seem good enough to say, well, Ealing's data in relation to BME representation in mental health data is just as the same as it is nationally. I kind of want to understand more about what it is that underpins that. So my pushback today to agencies is to say, don't give me any more data. I want you to give me an analysis of what the data is telling us. If the root causes of that overrepresentation are around poverty or around, kind of employment or other issues, then I want us to understand that, so we've got a grip on it for Ealing. So it's an issue we haven't yet cracked, but I just want to say that we're kind of on that, really. You will see the usual kind of information about age and gender, and you will see that the most abuse again is alleged to occur in individuals' own homes. It's pleasing that we are seeing more cases this year where the adult at the centre is telling us that the risks have been identified appropriately and the concerns addressed. But I would like to see that at 100%. And at the moment, it's it's around 71%, but 16% where no risk has been discovered. So I'd like us to just improve our performance on that a bit more. I suppose the bit that concerns me is the 13% where some risk is judged to remain after intervention. So I want to understand that a little bit better. I want to just say that, we've done a really positive job, I think, on the front door within Children's. I'm trying to encourage some learning from Children's across to adults, because I would like us to think about whether we can have an integrated multi-agency front door with one point of access, so that everybody's absolutely clear about where things need to go when there's a concern or a worry. And you will see kind of in the report, we've tried to give some examples on page 18 of how we've engaged our workforce. We've tried to share the learning that we've got from serious cases and illustrate what we did when we took that learning. And we are trying very hard to make sure that on the priorities, we are able to talk about, we don't just set priorities, but we try to see a difference in terms of how we do things. So page 24 of the report, you'll see financial abuse and exploitation. We are working closely with the Safer Ealing Partnership to look at activity in relation to vulnerability and cuckooing. We're doing some work in relation to scams and areas of vulnerability, and I say doing because that work continues. We are focusing on issues around transition and mental health, and I think that some of that work is definitely beginning to make a difference. Some of our young adults within the Young Ealing Safeguarding Group did a piece of work that transitions both partnership arrangements around raising awareness about mental health and stigma, and we've used that across both groups. And we've done some work this year on raising awareness amongst our practitioners of self-neglect. Self-neglect is one of the hardest forms of abuse to tackle, but our practitioners now have the benefit of some of the most up-to-date learning and some tools that will help them to assess that. You will note from the report that the addition in terms of the priorities that we've made in this report is we want to do more around engaging our community and users in adult safeguarding. I think we've done a great job in Children's of having user-led developments we haven't done so well on the adult side. So we want to have a bit of a push on that going forward into the next year. So that's kind of where we are, and I'm happy to take any questions. But again, on the adult side, you know, I can give you an assurance that we are coping with the increased demands. We are able to see sustained improvement, but some of those issues around capacity and around workforce and workforce capacity in particular are things that we will need to keep an eye on.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Do we have any questions? Councillor Rice.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sheila. And probably just a couple of points. I mean, the first thing that I'll just mention about is because you talked about people from ethnic minorities maybe suffering from mental health issues due to the pandemic. It was just one thought that came to my mind is that maybe some people from ethnic minorities were in the types of jobs where they had to go out and work during the pandemic, and they must have had a very terrifying time thinking they might pick up something along the way. So, but I've got no evidence for that. But that's just a thought. Yeah, just on one other, the other point, main point I wanted to ask about and ask a question on was something I heard about recently. Was something I'd not really thought about before, and that was the huge prevalence of domestic abuse and domestic violence, where the victim's actually a disabled person. Because you talked a lot about vulnerability, and there's apparently a big problem where women who don't have their eyesight are becoming victims of domestic abuse, and they can't actually find a way out because it's far more difficult for them to be able to help themselves in the situation. They can't even necessarily avoid a punch, you know, in the way that maybe other women can. So I just wondered really if we know very much about the kind of prevalence of domestic abuse and violence in situations where there's a disabled person who's the victim, and what is actually going on out there to help reach out and to keep an eye out and to make sure sort of women and maybe other members of the family are okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. If I can, I will just comment on the mental health and COVID. I think that's a really good point. I think what we know about our workforce, particularly those in the frontline caring professions, was that we see an overrepresentation of some of our BME communities and women in particular. We know from some of the work that was done during the height of the pandemic that you know, the stress and the impact was huge. And I kind of alluded to it in my introduction. We're only just really seeing some of the impact of that. So it is something that we are keeping, you know, an open kind of mind to, really, in terms of judging that. There is definitely a link between that issue and the fact that retention of some staff in those frontline caring professions has become more of a challenge since COVID. You know, people have left because of the stress. I've no doubt about that. But we're live to it, and we're looking at that as an issue. On the domestic abuse, it's a really interesting area of work, because you would expect that the Safeguarding Partnership and Board lead on domestic abuse, but we don't. It's the Safer Healing Partnership that leads on that. We are a contributor to the work that goes on. However, domestic abuse is something that both partnerships, children and adults, have taken really kind of seriously in terms of both raising awareness and being, I guess, charged to making sure that people are alive to the issue and that they are seeing it when it exists. We don't know enough, I don't think, about domestic abuse and disability. We are doing a number of deep dive activities at the moment. This year we started a piece of audit activity looking at some adult-based domestic abuse cases where mental health is also a feature, with a view to trying to get a better understanding of its prevalence, really. Because I think what's interesting is that if you talk about domestic abuse and the children's safeguarding arrangements, people are very quick to pick up the impact of domestic abuse on the children. But actually, the conversations about domestic abuse in partnerships that are childless and where there might be additional vulnerabilities is less forthcoming. And I don't really understand why that is. So, you know, as a board, we are trying to and are commissioning a number of strands of work to understand domestic abuse and vulnerability in adults better. And I will certainly pick up and make sure that that strand of disability is part of the thinking in that ongoing work. So hopefully you'll see something in more detail, perhaps next time we report.
Well, Councillor Driscoll next.
Thanks. Just to come back to a couple of the points that you actually raised, and it's about the risks, the reduction, removed, no risks, and remaining risks. It's probably almost expressed as a Venn diagram rather than discrete areas, because if a risk is reduced, it still remains. So, but if a risk has been removed, it's different from being reduced. So it's just clarifying, maybe for future reporting, the difference in those areas. Maybe remaining is it wasn't mitigated and it hasn't been changed. Maybe that's a greater clarification. But just linking that also towards the increase in inquiries and referrals and sort of mental health reference as well. I'm just curious, is the capacity to make an intervention or reduced impacted by access to mental health support services? And how is that reviewed or played out, monitored, so we can understand where the mitigation or reduction in impact has played by lack of access or very long waiting lists for mental health support services? Because I think that could have a long impact on what we see as improvements in individual circumstances. And I totally accept that a lot of these very succinct descriptors represent massively complicated cases and that are massively disparate in their nature. So it's very difficult to get something so succinct encapsulated in a couple of words there. So just trying to clarify how that reporting can be done.
I wish, Councillor Driscoll, that you could influence the Department of Health in their setting of the categorisations for reports, because the categories of risk identified and action taken, risk reduced or removed, or no risk discovered, or risk remaining, are broad definitions set by the central government department and part of the reporting framework. So it is really difficult. But I think you've raised a really interesting point, because there is something about how do we articulate that to people so they know what it means. And I will certainly take that back and talk to our performance people about how we can explain that in terms of what it actually means. I think that in some of those cases where risk has been judged to remain, it's often the kind of case where a safeguarding alert comes in, it's picked up by professionals, and then the adult decides that they don't want to engage with somebody. And, you know, in adult services, if somebody's got the capacity to say, thanks ever so much, I know that there's some risk here, but I don't want any services from you. You have no alternative but to withdraw from that if the person has got capacity. And I'll give you an example of that, because I think this example illustrates, you know, what I'm saying. I dealt with a case last year involving a family where there was an elderly woman being cared for by her immediate family, and the quality of care was not good and the home conditions were not good. But professionals did their best to try and persuade the family that actually there was an alternative to them caring for her because the care wasn't good. They declined that offer of an alternative provision for their mother, and their mother declined the offer of the place. So the mother stayed in the family, which, you know, people were concerned was actually neglectful in its care of her. But actually, because she declined, there was nothing else anyone could do. So risk remained in that instance, despite the fact that all of us would think that was a very unsatisfactory situation. But it was judged that she had the capacity to make that decision for herself. So some of those 13% are often those kinds of cases where an adult just decides that actually, yeah, this might be risky, but I want to stay here. And that doesn't leave any of us feeling good, particularly. The second point that you raised about mental health, there is no doubt, you can't open a newspaper or look at the news without seeing some of the pressures on mental health services. We know that there are waiting lists. We know that access to support services for mental health remains, a real challenge, and Ealing is no exception to what is happening across the country. I think there are two levels for that. I think low-level support is not good for people who want counselling and just, the ability to talk through issues that are going on for them. But at the other end of the spectrum, where you've got people with very complex mental health challenges, there isn't the bed space for them either. So it's a national issue for us. And I think it's something that we talk about on a regular basis in Ealing, both ends of the spectrum of that. And one of the reasons why we want to seek to engage more with our VCS sector is because our VCS sector and some of the organisations that we have in Ealing are saying, well, we think we could do more some of those low-level mental health counselling support type situations than we're doing now. And on the other end of the spectrum, I crafted a letter just this week to the national panel for safeguarding to say that beds for individuals with very complex needs, of which mental health is one, is becoming so severe an issue that we are worried about the implications of that for some individuals. Yeah, it's a difficult one.
Oh, Councillor Kumar, final question.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, you mentioned, if I heard it correctly, that you do not have a lot of information on the adult domestic abuse figures. But if you're working with the police and the local authority, I mean, we have a very good department where that information is available, but certainly, I mean, being on several committees, I've heard that domestic abuse, especially in the elderly, has been, really high since COVID in particular. And it's quite heartbreaking to see that these really elderly people who are suffering domestic abuse have got no choice at all. They have nowhere to go because they are at that stage in their life where they don't want to move out. They will not seek help, and they just suffer, and that results in mental health issues. So, I mean, I know that you oversee the way the system works, but I think looking into this further would actually be, I mean, not just giving a statutory requirement a report. It would be something that, I would like to see a bit more done on that.
Sorry, I probably didn't explain myself very well. Sorry, probably didn't explain myself very well. I think what I tried to say and probably didn't articulate very well was that safeguarding boards do not lead on domestic abuse in Ealing, and therefore we don't routinely receive all of the performance data from the police. The lead for domestic abuse sits with the Safer Ealing Partnership. We do have good relationships with them, and we do get some domestic abuse reports. We certainly get trend information, but you will note from the children's report, domestic abuse is a priority for us. And it's also something that we are addressing through the adults work as well. So certainly I think that in the report you get next year, you will have a richness in relation to response on domestic abuse. For the reasons that you articulate, we are concerned about it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sheila. Thank you. I think that's it. No more questions. Thank you very much, Sheila. Very good
Chair,
report.
can I just Chair, if I may, can I just take this opportunity to say this is the last time you will hear from me. I'm actually leaving Ealing in March, and a new independent scrutineer and chair will be appointed. And if I may, I just wanted to take time to say thank you to yourself and Sam and to committee members for always welcoming me, and for listening and contributing to the report. It's been really helpful.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Councillor Crawford would like to say something.
Yeah, I'd just like to say Sheila's presented to my health committee in a previous iteration of these reports, and I think it would be appropriate that we record our thanks from this committee and from the local authority and the elected members for the work that Sheila has done. She's come in and done excellent work, really established this role, and if I'm allowed to say so, Chair, I know she's independent, but we'll miss her greatly. Her candour, the detail, and the forensic way she's investigated some very difficult issues with complete independence and a desire to make sure that everyone's voice is heard is so valuable, and the depth of quality of what we've got from our reports has been outstanding. So I'd like to propose that we record some sort of vote. I don't even know if we can, but if Sam's nodding that we can. So yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I think everybody will be completely in agreement with Councillor Crawford there. Have you heard that all, Sheila?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. I'm still here till March, so I'm sure I'll see some of you, but take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, I've got Councillor.
Thank you.
Nine's got a question. Oh, no, doing a thumbs up. Agreed. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. So in terms of the recommendations, we note the work of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership and Adults Board. We're happy with that. And thank you very much. And we'll move on to one final item, which is the work programme, which you have before you. Is it agreed? Agreed. Yes. Thank you. End of the meeting. Thank you very much.